Happy Monday, everyone. This is Martha with Nature Niche. And this week, I'm making my fourth post in a series in honor of National Bird Feeding Month, where I'm focusing on native plants that we can conserve on our landscapes and purposefully plant in them to help support our native birds' natural diets. Today, I'm focusing on nectar for hummingbirds and other species that you may not realize also drink nectar. I think those of us who have hummingbird feeders up have probably also witnessed the orioles, at least attempting to drink out of those. But according to Audubon, at least 53 North American bird species drink nectar. So besides the hummingbirds and orioles, they are the main ones, but there are also mockingbirds, grosbeaks, tanagers, several warblers, including Tennessee and Cape May warblers, um, the yellow-bellied sapsucker, and downy woodpeckers that partake of nectar and also tree sap. So the birds can drink nectar from flowers, and the sapsuckers, including our yellow-bellied sapsucker here in Michigan, actually that species will create wells by pecking little holes that collect tree sap, and then they lap up that oozing tree sap, and they also go after insects that get stuck in those sap wells. And other birds will come and partake of that tree sap as well. So this is a photo of a paper birch in my own yard, and I noticed these sapsucker wells last spring. This is a closer look at those wells, and so I was glad to see them and to know that not only my sapsuckers but my local hummingbirds had that as a food resource. I think it's important to remember that these nectar drinkers, it's not the only thing in their diet. This just to show you an example from Cornell Lab of Ornithology is all about birds. If you look at the ruby-throated hummingbird and take a peek at its life history, under food, they mention tubular flowers, but that the birds will also drink tree sap and catch insects and prey on mosquitoes. So if we didn't love our hummingbirds enough already, there's just one more reason. Gnats, fruit flies, and small bees and spiders. So it's important to keep that in mind, that insect. And then many of these species, like we talked about orioles last week, also eat a lot of fruit. Our ruby-throated hummingbirds here in Michigan do migrate down to Mexico and other regions in Central America. And to do so, they migrate across the Gulf of Mexico, flying up to 500 miles at a time, which, if you think about how tiny they are, is quite an amazing feat. And they migrate during the day, and they fly low so that they can see and stop at nectar resources they find along their journey. So some important tips I wanted to share about choosing native plants, just some general rules of thumb. You want to select nectar-rich plants with red or orange or even sometimes pink to white tubular flowers, but they really key in on that color red. And often these flowers are numerous, and they bloom. They have blooms that point out or like sideways or downward. And it's really important to try to get as many native species blooming in the spring, summer, and fall months, so throughout that growing season. And especially in August and September, those blooms help support the hummingbirds during fall migration. And you want to make sure you're planting a species in a mass, so multiple plants of a given species, so that there's a larger area of flowers and it's easier for species like our ruby-throated hummingbird to find them. Okay, so as I did in past weeks, I will start out with the Audubon Native Plants database. For those who didn't watch my past post, it's zip code based, which I found pretty restrictive. So I went with a Kalamazoo, Michigan zip code. You can play around with it and see how that changes. And then I'm going to go through native plant species from the ground up. So ground covers, and then shrubs, vines, and then trees. So I use the filters on this database to select annuals and perennials. Click Nectar as the resource type that we're looking for. I did try clicking just hummingbirds and orioles, but found that wasn't really necessary. Just filtering on Nectar seemed to get me where it made sense. So I thought we'd take a look at some of these ground cover, perennial, and annual species. So, for example, in the like blue lavender color, harebell, Campanula rotundifolia, is a species you might consider planting in your yard. A butterfly milkweed, my understanding is that hummingbirds are attracted to the orange color, that they tend to like larger tubular flowers, but this can help attract them to your yard and, of course, support insects that they also like to eat. You see a lot of resources pointing out cardinal flower, Lobelia cardinalis. I think it's important to remember this species is a biennial to short-lived perennial and does best where you have moist open soil where it can reseed itself readily. So ditches and rain gardens or places where you don't mind disturbing the soil a little bit to help it reseed itself in the long run. Flowers in the genus Silphium. So this is Silphium perfoliatum, cup plant. Different blazing star species in the genus Liatris. Foxglove beard tongue, Penstemon digitalis. Nice tubular flowers. This is a really great species. There's often a lull in June, and this species blooms during that time. So I think it's a great thing to have in butterfly and hummingbird gardens. Another lobelia, Lobelia syphilitica, great blue lobelia. Another great tubular flower. Fireweed is another nice one that's very adaptable to different situations. Species in the genus Monarda. This is Monarda fistulosa, bee balm or wild bergamot. A great spring woodland wildflower to offer is wild columbine, Aquilegia canadensis. That's a great early season one. Another Monarda species, Monarda didyma. This is the Oswego tea. That's more of an eastern species, but it is considered native to Michigan. This is an annual, Impatiens capensis. I showed this earlier when talking about tubular flowers. Spotted touch-me-not or jewelweed are the common names. This is one you won't find in the native nursery trade, at least not too often, but one that you might be able to collect seed or conserve. It may naturally be occurring in your ditches or wetlands on your property. So this would be a good one to conserve. Turtlehead, Chelone glabra is a nice one. And species in the genus Phlox. So this is woodland phlox, Phlox divaricata, as an example. While the species in the Audubon database were great examples, there are so many more to be had. So I wanted to share this really nice resource with you, the Michigan hummingbird guy, Alan Chartier. He is the project director for the Great Lakes HummerNet project, lots to do with the ruby-throated hummingbird. And there's some great resources on this page. So I just wanted to show you how to get to those. There's the hummingbird garden tips for northern gardeners, and also a list of native Michigan nectar plants. So for butterflies, with a focus on butterflies, but many of those species also serve our ruby-throated hummingbird. So I wanted to share that. And then this is a harder to find website that Alan created, but I use it so often. It has Michigan native species. They're organized, I think, roughly by bloom time. And he has that color coded over here with spring being in green, summer bloomers more in red, and then things that bloom in the fall, like the spotted, the jewelweed, Impatiens capensis I showed you down here at the bottom as a fall bloomer. And then it gives you flower color and kind of what kind of species it is. So I wanted to share this and kind of run through other species that weren't in that Audubon database, in part probably just because of the zip code I was searching under. This plant list has things that aren't necessarily easy to find in the nursery trade, so that's important to remember, but it'll get you thinking, looking, and help you conserve those native species on your properties as well. But things in the Dicentra genus, squirrel corn and Dutchman's breeches, some of our beautiful spring ephemeral wildflowers, help support hummingbirds. Other herbaceous things earlier in the spring, Virginia bluebells, Mertensia virginica. That is state threatened, so harder to find in the nursery trade. The native nursery trade, although it is readily cultivated, and you can get basically non-native genetics fairly easily of this species. Indian paintbrush is another one that wasn't in that database. And wild lupin's a great species for hummingbirds. Wood betony in the genus Pedicularis. This is another one that's a little harder to come by in the nursery trade, but if you have a prairie ecosystem or oak savanna kind of area, this might be species in this genus you might conserve. Besides the foxglove beard tongue, we also have hairy beard tongue, Penstemon hirsutus, and fire pink's another one. Our milk vetches in the genus Astragalus. Our false foxgloves in the Areolaria genus. We have several campanulas besides the harebell that I mentioned. And Gerardia. This is another one harder to come by in the nursery trade, but you might find. I've seen species in the genus Agellinus in like wet to mesic prairies, especially lake plain prairies with fluctuating water tables. So that might be something you already have to help support our hummingbirds and other nectar drinkers. What else? So the lobelias, mimulus, so monkey flowers in the genus Mimulus are another great one. And just wanted to point out Monarda punctata, horse mint, which is a great dry, harsh, like sunny, sandy, tolerant species. Obedient plant, Physostegia virginiana. The vervains in the genus Verbena are also great. quickly, here's some photos. There's the Gerardia and the Agellinus genus, obedient plant, and blue vervain. Some other species that I found, different resources, Illinois wildflowers, and places like that. My own native plant database from the native plant sales we hold. You could also consider the the Solomon seals in the genus Polygonatum, so biflorum and pubescens, are good hummingbird plants. Baptisia australis, wild blue indigo, which is nearly native to Michigan, more to the south, but does well here. And of course, don't forget Michigan lily, Lilium michiganense, as potential hummingbird plants to include in your landscape. Before leaving the herbaceous plants and moving on to woodies, I wanted to show this other resource I pointed out on the Hummer Net website. These are the Michigan native nectar plants with a focus on butterflies. But what I really like about this plant list is that it's organized by blooming month, roughly. And so it's a really quick way to look as you're organizing and designing a native planting to make sure, okay, I have things blooming for the hummingbirds and other species in the spring, in the summer, and into fall. So moving on to woody plants, I selected for shrubs and vines back in the Audubon database. The only return I got on that was Sambucus racemosa, or pubens, the red elderberry, and that I didn't see for hummingbirds on other lists. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but let's take a look at some of these other resources. We do have native honeysuckles, and so I wanted to point those out. Not all of them are readily available in the native plant nursery trade, but if you have them, you definitely want to conserve them. So American fly and swamp fly honeysuckles, Linicera canadensis, and oblongifolia. Bog rosemary would be another one. Sheep laurel and bog laurel in the genus Kelmia. Another native honeysuckle. I did want to point out Linicera dioica, glaucus or red honeysuckle. This one is more readily available for sale in the native plant nursery trade. I try to bring it in for my native plant sales whenever I can. So I think that's it for shrubs on this resource. And then this is the other link I pointed out on the HummerNet main website, the tips for hummingbird gardening for northern gardeners. And the main thing I want you to see here is that the native plants that are native to North America, not in the northern U.S. in particular, but not necessarily Michigan. But if you're willing to take that broader view of what's native and what you'd like to put in your landscape, this is very helpful. So it has some top plants that we've already talked about. The vine Linicera sempervirens, and then trumpet creeper, the trumpet vine that you often see planted for hummingbirds. Campsis radicans is native, just not to Michigan in particular, and the spotted jewelweed that we've already talked about. But they also have a nice shrub section here where there's chokecherry, Prunus virginiana, so you can add that to the shrub list for hummingbirds. Hopping back into the Audubon database to take a look at, I checked trees and evergreens just to see what I'd get back. They brought up a redbud, Cercis canadensis, and tulip tree, Liriodendron tulipifera, as nectar species for our hummingbirds. And then navigating back to this list for the northern gardeners, you can see lots of things in blue native to the northern U.S. So a native to Michigan, black cherry, Prunus seratna is a great one. Same thing, flowering dogwood, Cornus florida, hackberry, Celtis occidentalis. We have, I believe, over 50 species of hawthorns in the genus Crataegus, native in Michigan. American holly, Ilex opaca, not necessarily native to Michigan, but nearby. Our eastern red cedar, I was a little surprised by this, Juniperus virginiana, but there must be something about that species that is good for the hummingbirds. Morus rubra, red mulberry. Just make sure you're not keeping white mulberry. That's an invasive species. This one's state threatened, so you might have trouble finding it, but certainly conserve it if you have it. Oak species in the genus Quercus. More southerly Aesculus species, so the buckeye and horse chestnut. Serviceberry. We have several species of Amelanchier native in Michigan. They're good spring floral resources for our hummingbirds. I'm not sure why Viburnum cranberry bush is here. I would put that over in the shrub category, but Viburnum trilobum would be one you could consider as far as woody plants go as well. Another nectar tree species to consider is Kentucky coffee tree, Gymnocladus dioicus. I am back in the Illinois Wildflowers website here, where you can investigate individual species, and under the faunal associations, we noted that there is documentation of ruby-throated hummingbirds pollinating that particular species. So there's another tree to consider. I also wanted to show back under yellow-bellied sapsucker, under the All About Birds website, thinking about trees that are good for sap, offering tree sap. So they have high sugar concentration in their sap. So species like paper birch, yellow birch, sugar maple, red maple, hickories in the genus Caria, and I also saw resources that mentioned butternut or white walnut, and American beech as potential sap trees that the sapsuckers will use. And I'll wrap briefly with a few more considerations for supporting our nectar drinkers with native plants. Species like hummingbirds and orioles use trees for perching and preening and nesting, and so having that woody plant structural element to your landscape is really important. Hummingbirds nest in the forks of small, stiff tree branches, so having species like oaks and hornbeam or ironwood, birch, poplar, hackberry, and some pines is a great idea. And for orioles, they tend to use trees with more drooping branches. They'll also nest in the forks and sometimes right along the trunk, but they like American elm, maples, poplars, willows, and conifers. The large trunks of trees are also a source for lichen, and hummingbirds attach pieces of lichen to the outside of their nests with spider silk for camouflage, and hummingbirds line their nests with soft fiber. So species with hairy stems, foliage, or fluff on their seeds, like cinnamon fern, pussy willow, thistles, leaving the dandelions in your yard, are examples of other ways you can support the life cycle of our nectar drinkers. So I know that was, again, a lot of native species, but I hope that helps you figure out what to keep and what to add to your landscapes to support hummingbirds and other nectar and sap drinkers. Take care and have a good week.